No one in the council chamber spoke. When Earth's name disappeared from the star map, it happened in less than a second. One moment. The blue world still shone on the great living display above the assembly floor. The next, its light was gone, erased by a cold command from the High Council itself. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien delegates watched in silence. Some looked away. Some stared. A few seemed afraid. Ambassador Lorien of the small Vesha Republic felt his throat tighten. "Record the vote," the council speaker said. "Earth is now outside galactic protection." The word sounded simple, clean, official, but everyone in that chamber understood what they really meant. Earth had just been marked for death, far beyond the council world, hidden in the outer dark between stars. Human listening stations caught the transmission only seconds later. The message was short, legal, cruel. By order of the Galactic Council, all treaties with Earth are dissolved. All borders are open. No protection will be given. In the underground command vault beneath the Himalayas, Admiral Elias Varen listened to the message without blinking. Around him, human officers stood frozen. No one asked questions. No one needed to. The Council had not declared war. They had done something worse. They had invited the whole galaxy to attack. Varen slowly stood from his chair and looked at the ancient metal wall behind the command table. On it was engraved a sentence older than the Council itself. "If Earth stands alone, Earth stands as one." He pressed his hand to the biometric seal below the words. Deep under mountains, beneath oceans, inside dead moons, and in silent shipyards hidden far from trade routes, systems began to wake. Old power grids hummed. Locked doors opened. Sleeper crews received their first signal in 20 years. Across human space, one message spread in total silence. Protocol ashfall has begun, and on the edge of the solar system, something vast turned toward the stars. Nobody in the council chamber knew it yet, but their betrayal had just awakened the one thing history had tried to bury. A fleet not built to win wars, but to end empires. 3 days after the council vote, the galaxy began to move. For centuries, the Galactic Council had been the center of order. Its laws shaped trade routes, protected borders, and stopped wars before they began. When the Council removed a species from protection, it was more than a political decision. It was permission across dozens of star systems. Fleets began to prepare. Some came for revenge. Some came for resources. Some simply came because they believed Earth would be easy. The Dravic Empire moved first. Their war fleets were famous across the galaxy. Their ships were large, armored, and built for destruction. The Dravic believed in strength, and they believed humans were a young species that had grown too quickly. Emperor Korthak himself watched the tactical display inside the command deck of his flagship. A glowing map of human space floated in front of him. "Is the council decision confirmed?" he asked. "Yes, Emperor," the fleet commander replied. "Earth has been abandoned. No species is bound to defend them." The Emperor leaned back in his throne. "Good." Around the table, his generals watched carefully. "For too long," Korthak continued, "humans have grown powerful while hiding behind council law. They build ships. They explore dangerous regions. They trade with half the galaxy." He pointed a claw toward the map. "They forget their place." The Dravic fleet would remind them. 100 warships moved into formation near the border of human space. Massive battle cruisers surrounded carriers and strike vessels. Each ship carried enough firepower to destroy a colony. For the Dravic, it was more than enough. After all, intelligence reports suggested that Earth only had a few defensive fleets nearby. A simple invasion. A quick victory. But the Emperor noticed something strange. "Where are the human patrol ships?" he asked. His tactical officers studied the display. None detected, Emperor. The room fell quiet. Human border patrols were famous for their stubborn presence. They rarely left their stations, even during peace. But now, nothing. No signals. No ships. No warnings. The border was completely silent. Korthak narrowed his eyes. "Send scouts forward." Moments later, 3 small reconnaissance ships jumped into human territory. They crossed the border, and nothing happened. No weapons fired. No communication signals. No defense satellites activated. The path toward Earth appeared completely open. One of the generals smiled. They are afraid. But Korthak did not smile. The silence felt wrong. Still, he would not show doubt in front of the commanders. "Advance the fleet," he ordered. The Dravik warship surged forward, engines burning bright against the dark sea of space. 100 vessels crossed into human territory, like hunters entering an empty forest. And still, nothing. Hours passed. Then days. They passed the first outer mining colonies. Empty. The station still floated in orbit, but their lights were dark. No workers. No ships. No distress calls. Scan for life signs. The Emperor ordered. None detected. The fleet moved deeper into human space. More colonies appeared, all abandoned. On the 5th day of travel, the fleet finally detected something. A signal. It was weak and old, repeating on a loop. The translation system decoded it. A human voice filled the command chamber. "This region is under evacuation order. Civilian vessels have already departed. Do not attempt to land." The message repeated again, and again, and again. The Dravik generals laughed. "They ran," one said. "They saw the fleet coming and fled." Another general nodded. "Cowards." But Emperor Korthak remained silent. He looked closer at the message. The voice was calm. Too calm. Not frightened. Not desperate. Just calm. Then the tactical officer spoke again. "Emperor, there is something else." "What?" "We are detecting unusual energy patterns in the outer system." Korthak leaned forward. "Explain." "Large gravitational disturbances, but not from planets." The officer adjusted the sensors. A new image appeared above the command table. Dozens of faint distortions floated in deep space. At first they looked like empty shadows. Then the sensors enhanced the signal. The room fell silent. Ships, hundreds of them, no thousands. But they were not moving. They were hidden in cold orbit beyond the asteroid fields, their engines completely silent. Their hulls absorbed almost all radiation, making them nearly invisible. And their design, it did not match modern human ships. The vessels looked older, heavier, stranger. Some appeared damaged. Some looked half repaired. But every one of them was enormous. The tactical officer spoke slowly. "Emperor, these ships were already here." The Emperor's claws tightened on his throne. "How long?" "Unknown." Another officer began scanning historical data. Moments later his eyes widened. "Emperor, some of these hull designs are from the first expansion era." That was impossible. Those ships were more than 200 years old. They should have been destroyed or scrapped long ago. But the sensors confirmed it. Thousands of ancient warships waited silently beyond the asteroid belt. The Dravik fleet had flown directly into their shadow. And then something even stranger happened. A signal came from one of the hidden vessels. Not a threat, not a weapon lock, just a single transmission. The Dravik translator converted the message. A calm human voice spoke. "This system is under evacuation protocol." The Emperor leaned forward, opened a channel. Seconds later, the image of a human officer appeared on the screen. He looked tired, older. His uniform was simple and worn, but his eyes were steady. "This is Emperor Korthak of the Dravik Empire," the Emperor said. "You stand between us and our rightful conquests." The human listened quietly. "You have no protection now," Korthak continued. "The Council has abandoned you." The human nodded slightly. "Yes," he said, "that is correct." One of the Dravik generals laughed loudly. "Then move your ships aside, human. Your colonies are already empty. There is nothing left to defend." The human officer looked past the camera for a moment, as if checking something. Then he returned his gaze. "You misunderstand," he said calmly. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The human folded his hands behind his back. "The evacuation message was not meant for you." Silence filled the Dravik command deck. "What?" the Emperor asked. The human continued speaking in the same quiet voice. "It was meant for our own people." The Emperor's claws tapped slowly on his throne. And why would humans evacuate their own systems? The human officer looked directly into the camera. Because when the Council betrayed Earth, we activated Protocol Ashfall. The name meant nothing to the Dravik, but something in the human's voice made several officers uneasy. The Emperor leaned forward. And what exactly is Protocol Ashfall? For the first time, the human allowed a small smile. It is a very old plan. The sensors in the Dravik fleet suddenly began screaming warnings. Energy spikes appeared across the hidden fleet. Thousands of ancient ships were waking up. Cold engines ignited. Weapons powered online. The shadows in the asteroid field slowly moved. The human officer spoke one final sentence. Your fleet is currently inside a military quarantine zone. The Emperor stood from his throne. Quarantine? The human nodded. Yes. Behind him, alarms began ringing across the Dravik command deck. New signals appeared on the tactical map. Not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands. Ships were rising from the darkness of the outer system. Old shipyards, buried docks, hidden repair stations, all awakening. And every vessel carried the same strange symbol across its hull. A symbol older than the Galactic Council. A burning circle. The ancient mark of the first human war fleets. The Emperor whispered slowly. What have you done? The human officer answered quietly. We finished evacuating. Then his eyes hardened. And now we begin the cleansing. To be continued. The Dravik fleet command deck was no longer calm. Red warning lights flashed across every console. Tactical screens filled with new signals every second. The quiet human system that had looked empty only hours ago was now crowded with ships. Thousands of them. Emperor Korthak stared at the growing map in disbelief. How many vessels are we detecting? He demanded. The sensor officer struggled to keep his voice steady. Initial count 12,000 ships, Emperor. A moment later another officer corrected him. No, 16,000. More coming online. The room went silent again. The Dravik fleet had entered human space believing they were the hunters. But now, on the tactical display, their 100 warships looked small, fragile, surrounded. Still, the Emperor refused to show fear. They are old ships, one general said quickly. Outdated designs. They cannot match our modern weapons. Korthak nodded slowly. Yes, ancient machines. But even as he said the words, something about the situation felt wrong. The human officer was still on the communication screen. Calm, watching. The Emperor pointed toward him. You expect me to believe these relics can stop a war fleet? The human did not react. They are not relics, he said. They are history. Before the Emperor could reply, another signal appeared on the communication network. But this signal did not come from a warship. It came from far away, from the center of the galaxy, from the Galactic Council itself. Inside the massive council chamber, panic had replaced the usual calm order. Delegates from hundreds of species were shouting across the hall. Large displays showed images from long-range probes watching the Dravik fleet, and the enormous human armada surrounding them. Ambassador Lorien of the Vesha Republic stood near the central table. His eyes were fixed on the screen. 16,000 ships. But the strange thing was not the number. It was their design. The vessels looked like relics from different eras of human history. Some were heavy war cruisers from early expansion years. Others were cargo ships converted into carriers. Some even looked like old colony defense platforms. Ships that should have been dismantled long ago. But they had not been destroyed. They had been preserved, prepared, waiting. The council speaker slammed a claw against the table. How is this possible? One of the senior historians stood up slowly. His species was ancient. They had been watching galactic events long before humanity reached the stars. And he looked deeply troubled. There is something we may have forgotten. The chamber grew quiet. The historian activated a small data panel. Ancient records appeared on the main display. These records are from 250 years ago, he said, before the current council charter was written. Several delegates leaned closer. What does this have to do with the situation? Someone asked. The historian hesitated. Then he spoke. 250 years ago, the galaxy experienced a conflict known as the Ashfall Crisis. Most of the younger delegates had never heard that name before, but several older species suddenly looked uncomfortable. The historian continued. At that time, humanity had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They were a young civilization exploring nearby systems. But during their expansion, they encountered something. The screen changed. A distorted star map appeared. Entire systems were marked in red. An unknown alien species had begun wiping out frontier colonies across several regions of space. No one knew where they came from. No one could stop them. Images of destroyed planets filled the display. Dead stations. Burned worlds. Entire civilizations erased. The historian spoke quietly. The council at that time debated intervention for years. But humanity did not debate. Another image appeared. Thousands of human ships leaving Earth. Primitive by modern standards. But there were so many of them. They gathered every vessel they had, the historian said. Military ships, cargo transports, mining vessels, colony ships. They turned everything into warships. The council chamber watched in silence. The human fleet entered the conflict zone alone. And what happened? Someone asked. The historian looked down. No one knows exactly. There were no surviving recordings from the battle. But when the fleet returned, the display changed again. The red marks across the star map slowly disappeared. The unknown enemy species had vanished. Every system they controlled was empty, every ship destroyed, every trace erased. The historian finished the story quietly. That was the Ashfall crisis. And after it ended, humanity dismantled most of their war fleet. But some historians believe they never truly destroyed it. They simply hid it. Across the council chamber, the realization spread slowly. Those ships, those thousands of ancient vessels, they were not leftovers. They were the same fleet, maintained for centuries, prepared in case something like the Ashfall crisis happened again, or worse. In the Dravic command ship, the Emperor had also received the council transmission. He watched the historical recording in silence. Then he slowly looked back at the human officer on the screen. You kept this fleet for 2 centuries? The human nodded. Yes. For what purpose? The human answered simply. For the day when the galaxy would turn on us. The Emperor clenched his claws. You planned to betrayal? No, the human said calmly. We prepared for survival. Around the Dravic fleet, the ancient ships continued to move. Their engines glowed with deep blue light. They were forming a massive ring around the invading force. The Emperor turned toward his tactical officers. How long until they can fire? The officer swallowed. They already can, Emperor. But something strange happened next. None of the human ships attacked. They simply held position, waiting. The Emperor stared at the map. Why are they not firing? The human officer answered. Because this is not a battle yet. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Explain. You cross into a protected quarantine zone during evacuation, the human said. That makes your fleet contaminated. Contaminated with what? The Emperor demanded. The human paused. Then he spoke carefully. With a very old problem. At that moment, a new alarm appeared across the Dravic sensor network. Long-range scanners detected something approaching the system. Something massive. Not a fleet, not ships. A storm. A cloud of strange energy moving through deep space. The tactical officer's voice trembled. Unknown objects entering the system. The Emperor looked back at the human officer. You planned this? The human shook his head. No. His eyes grew darker. We expected them sooner. The Emperor felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Expected who? The human looked directly at him. The species we fought during the Ashfall crisis. The energy storm grew larger on the sensor display. Thousands of strange signals appeared inside it. Ships, but not like any known design. Sharp, alien, hungry. The human officer whispered the final words. They finally found us again. To be continued. The silence inside the Dravic flagship did not last long. Every sensor console suddenly filled with warning signals. Red lights flashed across the command deck as the unknown storm moved closer to the system. At first, it looked like a strange cloud of energy drifting through space. But as the scanners focused, the truth became clear. It was not a cloud. It was a fleet. Thousands of dark ships moved inside the storm like predators hiding in smoke. Their shapes were long and sharp, like blades cutting through the stars. Their hulls were black and uneven, almost organic, as if the ships had grown instead of being built. No one on the Dravik command deck had ever seen designs like these before, but the human officer on the screen recognized them instantly. His calm expression finally changed. "They are here," he said quietly. Emperor Korthak stared at the tactical display. "How many vessels?" The sensor officer tried to calculate. "Unknown. Signals are unstable. But at least 20,000 ships." The room fell silent again. 20,000. And more were still appearing inside the storm. The Emperor turned slowly toward the human officer. "You knew they were coming." "Yes," the human answered. "But not this soon." The Emperor's voice grew colder. "You allowed my fleet to enter the system knowing this enemy was coming?" The human did not argue. "You entered on your own decision." One of the Dravik generals stepped forward angrily. "You used us as bait." The human officer shook his head. "No." He pointed toward the tactical display. "You place yourselves between Earth and the direction they were approaching from." The Emperor looked at the map again. Only then did he understand. The storm of alien ships was not coming toward Earth first. It was coming directly toward the Dravik fleet. The invading empire had unknowingly become the first target. The Emperor slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. "Prepare all weapons." Across the Dravik fleet, massive cannons powered on. Shield generators rose to full strength. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier bays. The 100 warships quickly formed a defensive battle formation. But even as they prepared, the strange enemy fleet continued moving closer. They did not slow down. They did not communicate. They did not change formation. They simply advanced. Inside the human quarantine fleet, thousands of ancient ships also shifted position. They did not move to attack the Dravik. Instead, they spread outward, forming a massive defensive wall across the system. Admiral Elias Varen stood inside the command bridge of the largest human vessel. The ship was ancient, older than most modern human cities. Its hull was scarred from battles long forgotten, but its systems were still powerful. The vessel's name was Resolute Dawn. Around him, human officers watched the incoming storm. "Enemy distance?" Varen asked. 30 minutes until contact, Admiral." Another officer spoke. "Dravik fleet is preparing to engage." Varen nodded slowly. "Let them." The younger officers looked surprised. "Sir, they wanted a war," Varen said calmly. "They will get their first lesson." Across the galaxy, the council chamber was watching the same battle through long-range probes. The storm of alien ships had become clearer now. The historian who had spoken earlier stepped closer to the display. "Yes, it is them." Several delegates looked frightened. "The same species from the Ashfall crisis?" The historian nodded. "They call themselves the Devourers." The name spread across the chamber like cold wind. "They do not negotiate," the historian explained. "They do not claim territory." "What do they want?" one delegate asked nervously. The historian looked at the map of destroyed worlds from centuries ago. "They consume civilizations. They break planets apart and harvest the remains." The chamber grew quiet. Humanity had not fought a normal war 250 years ago. They had fought extinction. Back in the Sol system, the Devourer fleet reached the outer defensive line. Their ships moved strangely. Instead of organized formations like most civilizations used, they spread out like a hunting swarm. Long black vessels rushed ahead of the main storm, straight toward the Dravik fleet. The Dravik commander shouted orders. "Target the lead vessels. Fire." A moment later, space exploded with light. Dravik plasma cannons unleashed massive streams of blue energy. Missiles streaked forward in burning lines across the dark. The first Devourer ships were hit. 2 of them shattered instantly. Another spun wildly before breaking apart. But the rest did not stop. They accelerated. Faster. Closer. The Dravik fleet fired again. More alien ships exploded. But dozens more rushed through the burning debris. Then the Devourers attacked. Their weapons looked nothing like normal technology. Thin red beams shot from the tips of their blade-like hulls. One beam struck a Dravik cruiser. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cruiser split cleanly in half. No explosion, no warning. Just a perfect cut through armor, shields, and engines. The two halves drifted apart in silence. The command deck of the Dravik flagship went still. Another beam fired. A carrier ship vanished inside a burst of white light. More beams followed. Within seconds, 5 Dravik warships were gone. The Emperor clenched his claws. Return fire. The fleet responded with everything they had. Missiles filled the sky. Energy cannons roared. Dozens of Devourer ships were destroyed. But the swarm kept coming, and they were learning. Some alien vessels began weaving between attacks, moving with strange intelligence. Others released smaller attack craft that moved like insects around the Dravik ships. Within minutes, the battle turned into chaos. Explosions flashed across the dark. Dravik ships tried to regroup, but the Devourers attacked from every direction. 10 warships lost, then 15, then 20. The Emperor stared at the destruction. His generals looked shaken. "These creatures are not fighting for victory," one officer said quietly. "They are hunting." Across the system, Admiral Varen continued watching the battle. His officers stood ready beside him. "Enemy strength confirmed?" he asked. "Yes, Admiral. Same species as Ashfall Crisis records." Varen looked at the growing battle. "Good." One young officer looked confused. "Sir, the Dravik fleet is being destroyed." "Yes." "Should we intervene?" Varen's voice remained calm. "Not yet." On the display, another Dravik cruiser was cut apart by the alien beams. 30 warships remained. The Devourer swarm moved closer. The young officer looked uneasy. "Sir, if they destroy the Dravik fleet, they will move toward Earth." Varen nodded slowly. "Yes." The officer waited. "But first," the Admiral said quietly, "we need to confirm something." "What?" Varen's eyes focused on the alien ships. "Whether they have evolved since the last war." At that moment, a Devourer vessel broke through the Dravik formation. It rushed toward the human quarantine fleet, directly toward the ancient warship Resolute Dawn. The bridge officers looked up. Enemy ship approaching. The alien vessel accelerated, its blade-shaped hull glowing with red energy, preparing to fire. Admiral Varen finally spoke. "Very well." He turned to the weapons officer. "Wake the Ashfall fleet." All across the system, thousands of ancient human ships powered their weapons for the first time in 2 centuries. Massive cannons opened. Energy grids activated. The Devourer ship fired its red beam toward Resolute Dawn. But before it could strike, a human weapon answered. A single bright pulse shot from the ancient flagship. The alien vessel vanished. Not destroyed. Erased. Every atom of the ship disappeared from space. The bridge officer stared at the empty spot where the enemy had been. Admiral Varen watched the Devourer swarm approaching. His voice was quiet, but not enough. Then he gave the order humanity had not spoken in 250 years. Begin Ashfall Phase 2. Across the system, 16,000 human warships turned toward the Devourer fleet. The real battle was about to begin. To be continued. For a moment, the battlefield became strangely quiet. Both fleets had seen something impossible. The Devourer ship that attacked the human flagship had not exploded. It had not broken apart like the others destroyed by Dravik weapons. It had simply vanished. The space where it had been was completely empty. Inside the Devourer swarm, several alien vessels slowed down. Their movement changed slightly, as if the entire fleet had noticed something new, something dangerous. On the bridge of the ancient human flagship, Resolute Dawn, Admiral Elias Varen stood calmly as tactical reports continued arriving. Enemy swarm adjusting formation, one officer reported. Devourer ships are spreading out. Another officer looked up from the sensor console. "They are scanning us now, Admiral." Varen nodded slowly. "Good. Let them study." Behind him, a young lieutenant watched the tactical display with wide eyes. 16,000 human ships were now fully awake. They were not arranged like normal fleets. Instead of one large formation, they had separated into hundreds of smaller groups. Each group formed strange geometric patterns across the system. To the lieutenant, it looked confusing, but to Varen, it looked perfect. The Devourer swarm finally reacted. Hundreds of their blade-shaped ships suddenly accelerated toward the human lines. They moved fast, much faster than the Dravik ships had been able to move. Inside the Dravik flagship, Emperor Korthak watched the new development carefully. His fleet had been reduced to only 30 surviving warships. Many were damaged, drifting slowly behind broken shield systems. But the Emperor's attention had shifted. He was no longer watching his own fleet. He was watching the humans. "Why are they spreading out like that?" one of his generals asked. The Emperor did not answer. Instead, he studied the human formations carefully. They were not random. Every group of ships seemed to be connected by invisible lines across the system, like a giant web. Then the Devourers attacked. The first wave of alien ships rushed forward like a dark storm. Hundreds of them aimed directly at the nearest human group. Their red cutting beams fired. But something strange happened. The human ships did not dodge. They did not retreat. Instead, several of them fired small pulses of blue light into empty space. At first it looked like nothing. Then the Devourer ships entered the area. Suddenly space itself twisted. Invisible gravitational traps activated across the battlefield. Entire sections of space bent violently, pulling Devourer ships out of formation. Several alien vessels crashed into each other. Others spun wildly as their navigation systems failed. Human weapons fired instantly. Heavy energy cannons and particle beams struck the trapped ships. Dozens of Devourer vessels exploded within seconds. On the Dravik flagship, the Emperor leaned forward. They prepared the battlefield. The realization spread through the command deck. The humans had not just awakened their fleet. They had turned the entire solar system into a trap. Hidden gravity mines, energy barriers, sensor ghosts, old defense technologies built during the ancient war. And now, they were all activating at once. Another wave of Devourer ships rushed forward. But this time they avoided the gravity traps. They moved faster, weaving through the human formations. One alien vessel fired its red beam directly into a human cruiser. The beam struck the hull, but instead of cutting through the ship, it hit a glowing defensive field. The human vessel absorbed the attack. Then its forward cannon fired. A powerful white beam slammed into Devourer's ship. The alien vessel shattered instantly. Across the system, thousands of battles were happening at the same time. Human ships fought in coordinated groups. Each formation supported the others with overlapping weapons and defensive systems. They moved slowly, calmly, like experienced hunters. The Devourers attacked with speed and aggression, but the human fleet forced them into control zones. Every time the alien ships rushed forward, they entered prepared traps. More Devourer vessels exploded, but the alien swarm was enormous. New ships kept arriving from the storm behind them. Inside the council chamber, the watching delegates were stunned. "This is not just a fleet," one observer whispered. "It is a system-wide defense network." The historian nodded slowly. "Yes, this is how humanity fought the first Ashfall War." Back on the battlefield, the Devourer fleet began changing tactics again. Several hundred alien ships suddenly stopped attacking. Instead, they moved toward the edges of the system, toward the outer human colonies. Admiral Varen saw the movement immediately. "They are trying to bypass us," the tactical officer said. Varen nodded. "They want easier targets." The young lieutenant looked worried. "Sir, the outer colonies have already been evacuated, but the infrastructure is still there." "Yes," Varen said, "and they will try to destroy it." He turned to the communications officer. "Activate Phase 3. Seconds later, a new signal spread across the human fleet. Several thousand warships broke formation, but instead of chasing the Devourers, they moved toward the outer regions of the system. The lieutenant watched the display. "Sir, they are leaving gaps in our line." Varen smiled slightly. "That is exactly the plan." Moments later, the Devourer ships reached the outer defense zone. They rushed toward an abandoned mining station orbiting a small moon. The alien vessels prepared their weapons, But before they could fire, the moon moved. At first, the Dravik sensors thought it was an error, but it was real. The entire moon slowly shifted position. Massive metal panels opened across its surface. Hidden engines ignited. The moon was not a moon. It was a weapon platform. Hundreds of enormous cannons emerged from its surface, and they fired together. A storm of white energy beams tore through the approaching Devourer ships. More than 50 alien vessels vanished in seconds. The rest turned away, retreating toward the main battle. Inside the Dravik flagship, Emperor Korthak watched the scene in disbelief. They turned their entire system into a fortress. Another general spoke quietly, and we invaded it. Back in the center of the battlefield, the Devourer swarm finally slowed. Thousands of alien ships gathered together in a massive formation. They had lost many vessels, but they were not defeated. Instead, the center of their storm began to glow. A new object appeared within the swarm, something much larger than the others. A ship, no, a living structure. Its surface twisted and shifted like a creature made of metal and bone. Energy pulsed along its spine. Admiral Varen looked at the new signal. His expression finally became serious. So they brought one. The lieutenant looked confused. One what? Varen answered quietly. A Devourer Queen. Across the battlefield, the enormous alien vessel began opening massive energy nodes along its body. A terrible red light spread across space. The tactical officer's voice trembled. Admiral, the energy output is enormous. How powerful? Varen asked. Enough to destroy an entire planet. The lieutenant felt a cold chill. They are going to fire at Earth. Varen shook his head. No. The red energy beam began charging. But the alien weapon was not aimed at Earth. It was aimed directly at the human fleet. The Devourers had decided to destroy the entire defense line at once. Admiral Varen slowly placed his hands behind his back. Very well. He turned to the bridge crew. Activate the final stage. The officers hesitated. Sir, are you sure? Varen looked at the glowing alien queen. Yes. If the galaxy wants to remember why the Ashfall fleet was feared. His voice became colder. Then today they will remember. Across 16,000 ancient human ships, hidden systems began powering on. Weapons that had never been shown to the galaxy before. And for the first time since the ancient war, the full power of the Ashfall fleet began to wake. To be continued. The red glow of the Devourer Queen spread across space like a rising sun. Energy built along the massive alien structure. Long veins of crimson light ran across its surface, gathering power for a weapon that could erase fleets. Even the surviving Dravik warships began pulling back. Emperor Korthak watched the charging weapon with tight fists. That energy level, it will wipe out everything in front of it. One of his officers nodded nervously. Even our ships, Emperor. The Emperor looked at the tactical display again. Between the Devourer Queen and the Dravik fleet stood the human armada. 16,000 ancient ships. They did not retreat. They did not panic. They simply adjusted their positions. Slowly, calmly, like a machine that had practiced this exact moment for centuries. On the bridge of Resolute Dawn, Admiral Elias Varen watched the alien weapon charge. How long until firing? He asked. The tactical officer answered. 30 seconds, Admiral. The lieutenant standing beside him looked worried. Sir, if that weapon fires at full power, it will destroy half the fleet. Varen finished calmly. The lieutenant swallowed. Then why are we not moving? Varen looked at the massive alien vessel again. Because this is exactly what we wanted. The young officer blinked. Sir, Varen pointed toward the tactical display. Look at their formation. The lieutenant studied the map. Thousands of Devourer ships had gathered close to the Queen vessel. They were protecting it with a dense wall of smaller ships. Then the lieutenant understood. They gathered together. Yes, Varen said. Exactly where we needed them. Across the human fleet, thousands of ships suddenly shifted positions. But they did not move toward the enemy. They moved away. The entire fleet spread outward, forming a massive ring around the Devourer's swarm. The lieutenant stared at the map. What are we doing? Varen answered quietly, closing the door. Across the battlefield, the Devourer Queen finished charging its weapon. A terrifying red beam exploded from the alien structure. It shot directly toward the center of the human fleet. But the humans were no longer there. The beam passed through empty space. For a brief moment, the alien weapon had nothing to hit. Then the human fleet activated their final weapon. Every ship in the Ashfall fleet fired at the same time. But the weapons were not aimed at the Devourer's ships. They were aimed at space itself. Thousands of powerful beams shot toward invisible points around the enemy swarm. At first, nothing happened. Then space began to fold. Massive gravitational fields appeared across the battlefield. Invisible barriers connected the firing points of the human fleet. The beams were not weapons. They were anchors, and together they created something terrifying. A cage. The Devourer swarm suddenly found itself trapped inside a collapsing gravitational net. Ships tried to escape, but every direction led into powerful gravity wells. Their engines screamed. Their hulls twisted. Some alien ships smashed into each other as the space around them warped. Inside the Dravik flagship, Emperor Korthak stared in disbelief. They trapped them. The human fleet had surrounded the Devourer swarm with a massive gravitational prison. Even the enormous Queen vessel struggled to move. Its red energy weapon fired again. But the beam bent sideways as the gravity fields twisted the path of light itself. On Resolute Dawn, Admiral Varen gave the next command. Phase final. Across the Ashfall fleet, 1,000 of the oldest ships moved forward. These vessels were different. Their hulls carried deep scars from battles centuries ago, and their weapons were enormous. The lieutenant looked at the tactical data. "Sir, those ships are powering singularity cannons." Varen nodded. "Yes." The lieutenant looked shocked. "Those weapons were banned by the Council 200 years ago." "Correct," Varen said, "which is why we kept them." The Devourer Queen tried to escape the gravity prison. Its engines burned bright red, but the gravitational cage continued tightening. The alien swarm was being compressed into a smaller and smaller space. Perfect targeting conditions. The weapons officer spoke. "All singularity cannons ready." Varen looked at the display one last time. 200 years of preparation. 200 years of waiting. For this exact enemy. Fire. 1,000 cannons fired together. Instead of beams, they released small spheres of pure darkness. Artificial singularities. Miniature black holes. The spheres drifted slowly toward the trapped Devourer swarm. At first, the alien ships did not react. Then the singularities activated. Space collapsed. The gravity inside the cage multiplied instantly. Devourer ships were pulled apart like fragile metal toys. Hundreds of vessels stretched and twisted before disappearing into black spheres. The enormous Queen vessel tried to resist. Its engines burned brighter, but the singularities kept multiplying. The gravitational prison collapsed inward, like a star imploding. Inside the Dravik flagship, the crew watched in complete silence. The Devourer fleet, the terrifying swarm that had once destroyed entire civilizations, was being crushed. One by one, the alien ships vanished into darkness. Then the Queen vessel itself began to break. Massive cracks spread across its living hull. Red energy burst out of the fractures. The creature ship tried to fire its weapon again, but the gravity forces were too strong. The enormous alien structure twisted violently, and then it collapsed into the singularity field. The red glow vanished. The Devourer Queen was gone. Across the battlefield, the remaining alien ships tried to escape, but the gravitational cage continued closing. Within minutes, the last Devourer vessel disappeared into the dark storm of singularities. Then, silence returned. The battlefield was empty. No Devourer ships remained. The Ashfall fleet slowly powered down its weapons. The gravitational cage faded. The artificial singularities collapsed safely into controlled containment fields before vanishing. The war was over. On the Dravik flagship, Emperor Korthak slowly sat back down on his throne. His fleet had been nearly destroyed. But it was not the Devourers that frightened him now. It was humanity. He looked again at the massive human fleet, still surrounding the system. 16,000 ships. Ancient, patient, prepared. The communication screen suddenly activated again. The same human officer appeared, Admiral Elias Varen. The Emperor stared at him. You kept this power hidden from the galaxy. Varen nodded. Yes. Why? The Admiral answered simply. Because power like this should only be used when extinction is the alternative. The Emperor looked at the empty battlefield, then at the human fleet. You could have used this against us. Yes, Varen said, but you are not the real enemy. The Emperor remained silent for a moment. Then he asked the final question. What happens now? Varen looked past the camera toward the stars. The Devourers will not return. The Ashfall fleet will return to sleep. But the galaxy has learned something important today. He looked directly at the Emperor. When the Council betrayed Earth, his voice remained calm. They awakened the fleet that once erased an empire. The communication signal ended. Across the system, the ancient human warships slowly began returning to their hidden docks, beneath moons, inside asteroids, deep under planetary oceans, once again becoming ghosts in the dark, watching, waiting, and across the galaxy, every civilization now understood a terrifying truth. Humanity did not build fleets to conquer. They built fleets to survive. And if the galaxy ever betrayed them again, the Ashfall fleet would wake once more.